So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Denton, and I'm ACT's Membership Experience Manager. Thank you for joining us today for ACT's second September webinar entitled, How are people commuting right now? And what are the trends by mode? This webinar is sponsored by Trakk. Thank you. Before we hear from our presenters this afternoon, I want to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. All attendees are on mute during the webinar. If you have a question or have a problem hearing us, please type it in the chat box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer your questions as the webinar gets going. We will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type in your questions as we go in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. When you're asking a question, please also identify who the question is for, if it's directed to somebody specifically, or if it's for everyone, you can just say for everyone. Finally, this session is being recorded, and we'll have the recording up on the ACT website within 24 hours after the presentation ends. Now I'd like to pass things over to David Strauss, ACT's Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT is currently working on. David?
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us today. As the premier association for TDM professionals, our goal is to build, as always, a strong community of individuals and organizations working to advance and implement TDM at their work sites and within their communities. We're thrilled to host webinars like today's, as they are an important benefit to you as a member of ACT, providing you with valuable information on latest trends and important knowledge to make you more impactful in the work that you do. We have a great audience today with over 250 registrants for the webinar. For each of our non-members joining us today, and there are many, welcome. I invite you to join ACT and be a part of this wonderful community of TDM professionals. I guarantee you that ACT membership will be a valued investment in your professional growth. After today's call, you'll actually get an email from Elizabeth inviting you to connect and perhaps find a time to talk about the benefits of membership and joining the organization. I know we have a full program, but before we get started, I want to take a moment to update everyone on some of the latest news from the association. I hope that many of you saw the announcement in today's Connections newsletter that hit your email boxes around 10:30 Eastern time or so. But if not, I'm pleased to announce the results of our elections for ACT's Board of Directors. We had a fabulous group of candidates that stepped up to volunteer for the 6 open seats on the board. Please join me in congratulating Diana Alarcon of the city of Tucson, Jessica Alba with Stanford University, John Ando with the County of Hawaii Mass Transit Authority, Andy Keaton with Commutify, Frank Mangiowi with ICF, and Lisa K. Schweier with Carnegie Mellon University. I know I look forward to working with each of them over the next couple of years, and I encourage all of you, if you know them, to reach out and congratulate them on their election to the board. Serving on the board is just one of the many opportunities for members to be engaged in guiding the direction of ACT. And soon we'll be opening up our call for interest to serve on one of ACT's 7 national committees. These include diversity and inclusion, finance, governance, membership, professional development, programs and events, and public policy. These committees provide members with the ability to dive deep into specific aspects of ACT's operations, where you can lend your expertise and unique skills to help push forward our work, introduce new ideas, and of course, take on an important leadership role within the industry. If you're looking for a way to contribute to ACT, this is rewarding and a highly valued role within the organization. If you have questions about any of the responsibilities, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to find a time to talk about it. Lastly, it was announced earlier this week that nominations for ACT's Impact Leadership Program were being extended to October 8th due to a high number of requests we had for additional time to seek travel permissions during the pandemic. If you or a member of your team are interested in strengthening your leadership skills building a cohort of peers from across the country, or deepening your knowledge of TDM, I invite you to submit an application for this 9-month program that kicks off with a 3-day retreat in January. It's a tremendous experience for all that get to go through it. If you want more information, visit the website and download a packet. Now on to today's webinar, How Are People Commuting Right Now and What Are the Trends by Moon? Sponsored by Trakk. Today's webinar brings together 4 companies with a view across corporate and institutional commute operations, talk about where we stand right now and the trends they see their clients across the country. Presentations will include recent data on commute patterns and a discussion on trends accelerated or changed by the pandemic, shutdown, and the restart. It's now my pleasure to welcome our moderator, Dominic Haigh, who's the Chief Revenue Officer for Trakk. Dominic has spent his career working with new technology ventures around the world, with the last decade focused on mobility. And at Trakk, Dominic works with managers and operators of private, public, and shared mobility services to optimize their operations and rider experience via the Trakk mobility management and reservation system. Dominic, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, David, and welcome everybody. And to those on the West Coast, let me say good morning to the East Coast centric people who preceded me on this webinar. So I'll be saying more about Trakk and going into the presentation, but we have a wonderful group of people on the call today. So we're planning on tapping into this hive mind of mobility expertise. So we're going to start with a poll. So Elizabeth, if you could throw up the first poll, please. So when do you really think your non-single occupancy vehicle commute ridership will be back to pre-pandemic levels? And by really, I mean, what do you really think? And not what you're telling your board and investors and so on. So if everybody please take a vote, take a vote right now, and we'll send the results back to you. Give you another 5 seconds. Everybody vote. Okay, Elizabeth, what do we have?
Sorry, I'm having, all right. And all right. Do you see it there?
Thank you very much. Interesting. It already is. I want to know who those people are. Okay, so the biggest one is 2023.
2023.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. At that point, let me hand over to our first speaker, who will be Marko.
Great, Dominic. Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen. Okay, great. Let's get started. So key thing I wanted to bring to the conversation today was just looking at some of the high level data that we've been capturing at Luum, and then, give a couple of takeaways as well, and some recommendations for some folks on this call as well. Now, high level, this isn't our data, but high level, this is effectively what I think we've all been experiencing as TDM professionals. Hybrid work will increase, become more normal, seeing some transit hesitancy, and we've got some data to back that up, and an uptick in parking demand. So this is kind of what we've all felt, what we've kind of seen, but now let's kind of dig into some of the details, because there are some specific commute modes and some specific applications that are doing some interesting things. So when we look at overall commute trips captured between Jan 2020 and July 21, unsurprisingly, a big drop, about 60% across the board, especially across buses, shuttles, carpools, etc. In that top graph where you see small spikes in commutes, that's when companies got excited to go back to work. Some people started coming back. 3 weeks later, got shut down, and then the numbers dropped again. If we take that data though and say, okay, what percentage of those commutes in a given month were split out by mode, you can see purple is telecommute trips, and that dark red is parking trips, and that little sliver band in the middle is transit. There's van pool at the top, but it's kind of difficult to see. Key thing here is that as telecommute trips are decreasing over time, they're primarily being replaced with single occupancy vehicle trips, to the point where, as a percentage of overall trips, they're much higher than they've ever been. And so that's kind of a key theme here, is we need to stop the shift from telecommute to SOV vehicles as a key kind of initial takeaway. In terms of van pools, they've actually been pretty consistent in many ways. I'm sure there are other folks on this call like Neil who can speak to that, but where you've got essential workforces in play, it's been like critical to getting that workforce to work. Okay, let's look at transit, carpool, and van pool. We've seen a small increase in carpool and van pool in very specific applications, primarily around colleagues who are commuting together. So you can't see it in the data here, but when we look at open network carpooling, that's kind of just stopped. But closed network carpooling, where people are commuting with colleagues who are adhering to the same COVID guidelines, the same rules, who are already working side by side at their place of work, they're the ones that are most likely to carpool and van pool. Overall, one of the kind of big drops we saw in that top graph was shuttle trips. Employer provided shuttle trips came to, in our data, more or less of a stop. And I think one of the key things that we saw here was that, and speaking to some of our partners, was that fixed route shuttles just weren't necessarily viable in terms of like how much they cost to run, how to get them kind of sustainable from that point of view. And one of the kind of critical initial takeaways has been like, okay, well, where's the dynamic shuttle solution in all of this that's meeting employees and people where they're at? And so I'll touch upon that a little later as well. But overall, transit relative to van pool and shuttle is doing well, but we also know transit is really lagging behind single occupancy vehicles. Overall, the headline is it's primarily parking and telecommute, with parking increasing steadily. And that's something that we as TDM professionals need to be really mindful of, because even if we don't achieve 100% commute rates, the same that we did in January for a very long period of time, and a lot of folks are saying it could take many years to get those non-SOV rates back up and running, we could actually end up with more single occupancy vehicle, more parking based commutes occurring as a number, even when there are less commuters overall, right? So less people will be commuting, but we're still going to fill out all of our parking. We're still going to create all this congestion. That's something that we need to be really mindful of and bring non-SOV modes to the forefront. So unsurprisingly, 60% drop in commutes overall. Tech companies, 85% drop. Pretty much there's just like some key essential roles that were going into the workforce. Again, unsurprisingly, healthcare, only 20% drop because it's very difficult to do that job remotely. Really interesting data point we found in healthcare was that carpoolers and van poolers relative to bus commuters is double, pardon me, is twice as what we had at the start of the pandemic. Right, so we had all these bus commuters and a small handful of carpool and van pool commuters, and that's really been flipped on its head. And so we've started seeing some interesting data around bus commuters shifting to carpool and van pool. Again, it's difficult to say exactly why. My kind of personal view looking at the data is that hospitals are dealing with staff and visitor parking management. They're really kind of at capacity right now. They need to find creative ways to limit parking demand. And again, because the policies they have around COVID, that it makes more sense to commute with a fellow colleague that you'll be working beside as opposed to being on a public bus. I think the other thing for the transit agencies on the call right now is also, are transit agencies providing really good flexible products for employers that actually do encourage daily decision making, or is it a kind of a monthly commitment? Another very specific data point that we found was that biking on university campuses, again, kind of similar to healthcare, but in this instance, biking really overtook buses as kind of a key mode of transportation, and parking has been relatively low. So, what does all this data mean? The post-COVID commute will look different. I'd say it already is different. I think it's very easy for us to speak about the post-COVID commute as something in the future, but the reality is that how people are commuting today and how they're commuting tomorrow is just going to be an evolution. There's no kind of single point in time when we're in post-COVID commute phase, because we are now in COVID commute phase. It's, people are commuting today, and it's important that we are meeting people and employees where they're at. And as TDM professionals, this is the pandemic has really been a critical life event. Not just talking about the great resignation, the fact people are moving jobs, but also this huge disruption as a result of the pandemic. So now is the exact opportune time for TDM professionals to be rolling out these policies. And to be really blunt with all my employer partners on the call, if you have seniority-based parking, get rid of it. If you have free parking, get rid of it. If you have monthly parking permits, get rid of it, because they will not work in a hybrid world. If you want to do healthy commute incentive programs that encourage sustainable, active, less stressful modes, now is the time to do it. If you want to do flexible commute subsidies that are helping employees get to and from work and giving them the best experience, now is the time to do it. Don't wait for your board, don't wait for your executives. When they tell you you're going back to work, it's already too late. You really need to be having that plan in your back pocket right now and rolling it out for your workforce that is commuting today. Transit agencies, look at pay-per-use programs for employers. I know King County Metro is doing a Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority doing a pilot right now that's about to launch. Think about the way you can work with employers to rebuild transit ridership by acknowledging that some people ride the bus or ride transit less, but try to get more people using it as an option 1 or 2 days a week. So think about kind of what your fare products are that really support that. And for all the suppliers, all the kind of the commute suppliers, the third-party mobility providers, make sure your solutions reflect daily decision-making, and that can really work with employer programs around subsidy management. I think it's really critical, as opposed to, what I like to say, being stuck in a monthly commitment. Because this is what employers are doing today, because we're working with them on it. So they are taking monthly parking permits and they are moving to daily permits. They are going from first come, first served parking to reserving the parking space to manage demand and ensure confidence to the employee how they're going to get to and from work, know that a space is waiting for them, or being able to reserve a seat on a shuttle, know that that is waiting for them. Big shift away from the promotion of shuttles, carpools, and van pools, and shifting it from promotion to being customized, flexible, subsidized is really critical. So seeing a big shift in those commute modes. And then bike racks as well, kind of bike racks, end of trip facilities will start rewarding people for riding their bike with incentives, with education. There are a ton of programs out there that you can actually do a ton of work in that field. So the big difference between making something available and promoting it, actively subsidizing it and kind of putting dollars behind it, and a lot of policy intent behind it. So for those that are looking to transition to daily decision-making, if you're not, you're going to get left behind. But we did produce a case study just recently with Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. So you can look at that on our website. But if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to myself, especially on any of the data slides where you'd like to know more.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marko. All right, if we could hand over to Michele at this point. Hi, Michele. You want to unmute?
Gosh, it's not a webinar if somebody doesn't say that, right? So are you seeing me here? You seeing my yeah.
Yep, it's good. If you want to go to screen mode. Beautiful.
Okay, looking good. All right. So this is where we are today. This is me. Michele Brooks. I'm Vice President at Transaction Associates. I have been working for over 27 years in the field of transportation demand management. That's why I could have put many things in those next 3 bullets, but those are the 3 that I picked for you. So just a little bit about me. I've done a lot of work with TMAs, commuter programs, and more recently designing and managing shuttle systems. So I'm going back and forth here between some some different screens, but Transaction Associates, kind of two parts of our company. We have a full service transportation consulting firm. That part of our business started first. We've been in business for over 30 years. And then in 1995, we split off a shuttles division. And so I think that gives us a little bit of a unique perspective on what people are doing. So I took 5 sample shuttle services that we operate. I'm going to just talk a little bit about what we've been seeing, with our clients and in the work that we've been doing. So I took a look at 5 sample shuttle services. These are connections to transit, and people are riding the shuttles, and it looks like ridership is trending in the right direction. So from what we're seeing, things are moving back towards people being more comfortable riding the shuttle services, and we're seeing ridership going up. But when you compare it to where we were the previous, 2 years before, sort of taking out the missing year in the middle, and you compare 2019 to 2021, I mean, we still have a way to go to bring those services back to where ridership was before. And I saw recently APTA, I think, said that transit ridership had dropped almost 80% between 2019 and 2020, and that's probably around what we saw. So it's consistent. And then hopefully, going to move back in the right direction. But in terms of what are people doing now, I think I agree, with all the data Marko just shared, this is the bad news, people are driving. I mean, that some of these headlines were terrifying to look at, because, we had been in a pretty bad traffic situation here in Massachusetts. And it's really unfortunate if we start to move back in that direction. But I do think that we need to give people some compelling reasons to stop driving. And as Marko said, some of that has to do with what we're going to offer them. So what are we seeing our employer partners do? A lot of surveys. I think employers want to hear from their employees. They want to be sensitive to their concerns, but they are developing plans to return to the office. So the survey data collected, I think, can give us a sense of what people are thinking, but these are weird times. So while they can help with planning, we need to be prepared to adjust. So we want to, I think, be taking that survey data, but be continually reevaluating where people are at in their process and how they feel about the different modes that they're using. And I think we need to use the tools that are at our disposal to try to assess feedback on an ongoing basis. So the caveat that we give people all the time is don't over rely on survey data for planning. I think survey data will give you a flavor, an idea for what people are doing, but it's not going to be a one-for-one correlation, because there's a lot of emotion in how people are thinking about their return to commuting. Flexibility. This is one that we're hearing all the time, but what exactly does flexibility mean? Here's what I think. I mean, the survey data, I think, is showing us that people are planning to be in the office Tuesday through Thursday. So, when given the choice, that's what they're going to pick for their commute. Prior to the pandemic, especially here in Massachusetts, we had seen a lot of unpredictable traffic events, not related to weather, not related to a traffic accident, just overcapacity on the roadways that we have. And I think that when we look at what potentially could happen around this new flexible commute and the spread of rush hour, we could be in for a lot more of that. And how do you plan for unpredictability? It's like, how do you plan for chaos? When you don't know how long your commute is going to take, it could be very challenging. So I wonder, going forward, what kind of impact this might have on productivity. And for me, I'm really wondering, as we're going into it, I think this is related to employers wanting to hear from their employees, but I wonder how much of this flexibility will be here to stay in the long run. And I wonder how much employers will move to maybe still giving people flexibility, but coordinating schedules a little bit more so people can't, choose exactly what they want to do. So everyone's talking about hybrid work, and that goes along with that, that flexibility. You're at home some of the time and you're in the office some of the time. So from an operator perspective, a shuttle operator perspective, it's hard to plan for that kind of flexibility. So I think what we found is, over the course of the pandemic, we did a lot of research on what kind of tools we could provide. And that it really is what led us to Trakk, because I really believe that people are going to need information quickly to be able to plan for what they want to do and to be able to adjust based on what's available. So they're going to need to know if seats are available on shuttles. They're going to need to know that they can access their tickets through mobile ticketing. Employers who are offering these services are going to want to see their ridership data quickly. They're going to want to know on an ongoing basis, are we over capacity? Are we under capacity? What does that look like? And then I think people are going to want to know, as they always do, where their shuttle is, so that they can decide, how they want to plan their day. So we're using Trakk for that. I think I have a theory. I have a lot of theories, but I have a theory that people have become even more accustomed to having information at their fingertips because they've been at home sitting in front of their computers and they have access to whatever they need. Oh, what do I want to know? I can look it up right here. And so I think that that trend is going to continue, and we need to be able to have tools that can be responsive to that. This is the last point that I wanted to talk about. I haven't heard too much talk about this, but my mind is still blown about what happened to curb space overnight. I had been, attending, as we all had, I think, over, prior to the pandemic, a few years, talk about AVs and what's going to happen when we get to that stage and how we're going to use the curb. Because, the curb is the domain of parking in most places, and how are we going to make those adjustments? And then throughout the pandemic, that change just happened overnight. All of a sudden, like, the curb wasn't for parking anymore. It was for eating. It was for riding your bike. It was for having little parklets and places that people could go outside. So I really hope that this is a trend that can continue, because when the curb is more available, it makes our shuttle programs work better. When we have safe places to pick people up, and it's not all about how do we fit in between the cars that are at the curb, it makes a big difference. Also, in Massachusetts, we had been looking a lot at what we can do with bus lanes rather. And I think that if we can continue that work and do more with bus lanes, then, we can get to maybe making buses cool and improving their image. And I think we would give people a compelling reason to get out of their cars. And of course, if people have questions, there I am.
Great, thank you, Michele. Elizabeth, if you could now, I think we have another survey to check that people are awake out there in ether. So pop one up. We have another question for the collective wisdom on the webinar. So this is where are you in terms of commute planning? Yep, that does come up. Thank you. So please pick one answer to this. Where do you stand as an organization, an agency, vendor in terms of your planning? I'll give you 10 seconds to think about that, and then we'll pop the answers back up for you. Okay, what do we got, Elizabeth? Give us the news.
All right, it looks like people are working on them or have already implemented. That's really interesting.
All right, the 16% are going with the flow. I like that. Okay, all right. Great, thank you. All right, so 1 second here. So Elizabeth, if you could let me share my screen 1 moment.
Yep.
One second, this is doing something.
While he's doing that, just a reminder, if you guys have questions, put them in the Q&A box.
Sorry, there we go. Little, just a second. Okay, I figured it out. This is why we practice. Okay, I'm going to do this because it's not doing what I. No. There we go. There we go. You all see that. I know it's not sharing properly. Never mind. I'm going to plow on because I can screens are messing up. Never mind. I hope you can all see that. So let me talk about myself briefly. As David gave me a great introduction. Main thing I wanted to explain is why I speak with this strange accent. It's because I'm actually from the UK, but I have been in the Bay Area for some 30 years and working with for the last 10 years with mobility technologies in the Bay Area and elsewhere. And a little bit about Trakk. So essentially, we're a software company, and so I'm going to be giving a point of view as that of a software company. So as we work with companies and with agencies and with property managers and operators and so on across the country. And our point of view of Trakk of what we view our role is of making it as easy as possible to provide a great technology experience for the rider. Zero friction for the rider, all the capabilities needed for operations, and ease of use for operations as well as for the rider is our focus. And as we also work with Luum, for example, with a number of our partners out there in the ecosystem. So let me start by looking at this information. So this is great information. I recommend that the link is down there bottom right, and this is one sample of the data. So this is from app. So this is what's happened to transit across various regions since the beginning of 2020. So we've all spoken about this. You can see spikes for holidays and so on, and slow growth from the trough in March of last year. Now, what we've seen at Trakk, then we're mostly, not all, but mostly we're dealing with private shuttle systems, things such as that. So I took a slice at this year. So this is what we're seeing, and this kind of reflects, I think, what Michele was talking about. And interestingly, I think a number of companies said, yeah, we're going back in June, and that then stalled out a little bit. But you see the general trend there. The other thing that's interesting, and it's a small data point, but interesting, there was continued growth in August. That normally you would expect to see things decline a bit in August, but I think seeing that's what there is this movement, this general movement, this tide of people who are going back into the office. So that's what we're seeing. So in terms of what we're seeing in terms of trends and things happening throughout across our clients in the business. So the first issue, I kind of categorize these. The first issue I'm talking about is about rider safety and physical distancing. And interestingly, you look at the surveys out there, probably the number one thing that people are most interested to know to get out of their car, leave their car at home and get on a shared vehicle is how full is that vehicle going to be? So am I going to have to sit next to somebody? Can I have a space next to me? So tools that let the rider see in real time. For example, how full is this vehicle? Am I able to reserve a seat and know that the seat next to me is going to be empty? And letting the operator be aware of that so they could perhaps size up the vehicle when needed to give people the confidence it's not going to be full. And then the other aspect of that is you're doing fare, even if you're not doing fare payment, but the ability to have it all be contactless. Again, the least things that people have to touch, then the better. And another piece of that is can also help with the rider confidence is of knowing who the riders are. It applies more in the private sector than the public sector, but knowing who the riders are. So if you need to do contact tracing, you can go back and say, okay, we know who was on this vehicle for that run that morning. We know who the driver was. If it does turn out somebody tests positive, we can go back and let people know. The second thing we're seeing is around responding to the new commute patterns in hybrid work. And there's three clear things, interesting things that are emerging there. One area which is of shared services, and I've worked on several shared services over the past 10 years, and it was something people were always very reluctant to consider. And what's happened now, as budgets have been reduced, obviously, as companies are watching that the ability to be able to combine resources, perhaps between companies or between neighbors on an office park, for example, or even opening services up to the public, then that as the budget pressure comes on, that's an area that can really help. Another aspect of that, which is an interesting one, is perhaps partly resulting out of the pandemic, is of perhaps companies who are all in the same office park or so on, the same tech park, realizing they have a common problem around congestion and parking, and that maybe if you're the large company in that campus, that you have a responsibility to work with your neighbors, the smaller companies in your neighborhood to work on those issues. The second one is an interesting one. I'm sure we'll hear more about this from Neil, which is the classic van pool model of having the same 5 or 6 people 5 days a week is obviously challenged by hybrid working, where people may be going in maybe 2 or 3 or 4 days a week. So having a way to make the ridership of a van pool still meet the requirements for ridership and making it cost effective, but instead of thinking as a van pool as being the same 5 or 6 people every day, think of it as being 5 or 6 people drawn from a pool of perhaps 20 people who are making reservations and choosing to go in on a particular day. And then the third one, as Michele mentioned, around on-demand services. Of part of the issue there is that there was a commute, an established demand pattern that we had learned over the past years, and then we had 2 years of 18 months or 2 years of people not going to their workplace. And over that time, people have moved, they've got different work patterns, they're new hires and so on. So mapping out the new demand map, what does that look like? Where do people want to come from? When do they want to come there? So perhaps thinking about rolling on-demand services into the mix and getting that data so you can map out where the demand is and see where it makes most sense to put in fixed routes. And then finally, as Michele was saying, the value of data, both for operations. So where are we expecting people to, where are the vehicles, knowing what the ridership is, the reporting, on-time performance, things such as that. And important for riders, knowing where's my vehicle, having the confidence it's coming, knowing what the capacity is and so on, as you're responding in this flexible way to the new demand. So that's what I wanted to say. I will now hand over to Neil.
Thank you, Dominic. Appreciate that. Let me share my screen real quick. Well, real quick's a relative term. All right, can everybody see that now?
Yep, fabulous.
Great. All right, thank you. As we look specifically at van pool, I think we'll see echoes of all the prior speakers and the impacts we're seeing right now, what we're expecting, what we can do to adjust, and the greater opportunities in the future. I will adhere, so I'm going to go a little quickly to the old axiom of if you go last, go fast. So I'll try to move along here. Hope if I can get it to move. There we go. Quickly about me. I don't always sound like Bill Clinton. I've got a little respiratory thing going on right now, so I apologize if you can see him in the background as I was talking. Been around for a long time in enterprise, very closely involved in mobility. The number one thing I would tell you here, though, is if you ever do take a square profile picture and accidentally turn it rectangular, you lose 10 pounds. So that's a little PowerPoint tip from me. So quickly, just sort of laying historical context, we saw what almost everyone else did, which is a dramatic drop off during the lockdowns. In our case, it was about 40% when the van pools hit rock bottom of what we lost. What was interesting, though, was that it was almost all B2B. Of course, we have B2B, we have federal, and we have military. And so the essential workers, and it was noted earlier in some of the earlier presentations, the essential workers continued van pooling. We had a lot of very valuable feedback from them in that they didn't appear to have the same reluctance or fear of shared transportation that other transits did during the lockdown. In addition to the direct and consistent communication and some safety practices and providing them with disinfectant and PPE and those sort of things, the primary reason was that van poolers were in a bubble. They felt safe because they were always with the same people. And so it created a sense of trust. And that was a very valuable thing to continue to have people using shared modes and transportation instead of going back to the SOV. During that drop off, we kept in touch with our B2B folks that did leave to find out what they thought they'd be doing once they went back to work. And what was interesting there was, of course, 3/4 of folks expected to go back to work eventually. But of those 3/4, the vast majority did not think they'd be going back Monday through Friday. Those that did, though, felt that van pool, if they could continue to find one that met their needs, would be a solution they'd be willing to do. So again, the positives of van pool, even during the COVID situation, was that that people felt comfortable doing it as long as it fit their needs, but their needs were changing. We look at what's going on right now. What we're seeing is the same thing everyone else has shown, and that folks are starting to go back to work. We are seeing a rise. As of right now, we're looking at somewhere around 5% month-over-month growth. That's the good news. The negative news, though, is that we're starting to see delays. When we talk to accounts, The Delta variant has created some scares in the marketplace, and a number of folks are pushing out now into Q1 of 2022, which when we look back to the earlier poll question of 2023, before you're finally back to normal, starting to feel that way. So it's going to be a long climb up from here for all of us, I think. So what's important is kind of what we're seeing from a trend perspective. And again, echoes to what a lot of other folks have already said. According to SHRM, McKinsey, and any number of other reports, just under 50% of American workers are going to be doing some form of hybrid when they come back. But the norm for this is not really being established yet. Companies are doing different things. They're allowing different things. And so you have varying levels of control and planning at the company level. Will they declare, make their folks declare the days they're going to be there and stick to a day of the week schedule, or are they going to let them come in where they want? For a number of reasons, we anticipate that this will eventually become more stable, and that companies will require that they have, if you're only going to come in 3 days a week, we know what 3 days those are. And we're going to push those out and try to even out what is currently a fairly unstable deal where, not surprisingly, if you're only coming in 3 days a week, people are taking Monday and Friday as their work from homes. So as Michele noted, you're seeing a lot of Tuesday, Thursday peak traffic. For company reasons, for traffic reasons, even for own personal reasons, we believe people will probably stabilize that over time, and we'll start to see a spread where people will start to pick up those Mondays and Fridays, either because their work wants them to, or because it just makes sense because the traffic is lighter. The other thing we're seeing, and was noted by Marko, is SOVs are even less economical to a consumer now than they used to be. They're already parked 94% of their lifetime. They were valuable when you were going to work every single day. Now you're going even less. But the independence that provides you of being able to just get in the car and go on the 2 to 3 days a week you go is what's making that come back. So we have to find a way to make that a reason for people to get out of the SUV rather than use the SUV. The other SOV, excuse me, not SUV. The other thing that we're seeing is there are a number of real estate and, again, HR reporting that are coming out that are saying that people, because they don't have to go to work as often, are making lifestyle choices that push them even further away from their office from a living standpoint. That pushes them even further out of the regular transit routes and the regular options that are out there. Again, pushing more towards an SOV, not the way we want folks to go. So the way that we have to do that is looking at the way that folks are moving in the future, whether they're moving out or they're coming in less frequently. How do we create opportunities for folks to take advantage of shared drives that they feel comfortable with, while also being able to not SOV? And as Dominic noted, one of the things we've already seen, obviously, is the traditional van pool is not going to work in that space. We're going to need to be able to fill not just a small van pool with 5 riders, but rather 10 riders that are partial riders that can now make up a van pool that comes in. That's going to be an economic reality of, I need to pay less because I'm not riding as often, but I'm going to need more people to keep that van pool economically viable for the van pool itself. If I'm not coming in all the time, I need easy ways of conveniently and trustingly, as Michele and Dominic noted, making a reservation, knowing I can get on that van, being ready to run on that thing, and then having real-time information about where it is. While my bubble has gotten larger, I still have the safety capability, and I still feel comfortable in that it may only be 10 people, but it's the same 10 people, and I work with them anyway. So there's advantages there that we need to continue to take advantage of. And finally, we just need to deal with the reality of new commuting. If you have multiple people and all of them are trying to come in on Tuesday, Thursday, I'm going to run out of seats. So we need to figure out a way to incorporate a more flexible van pool into an overall commuting environment and an economy that allows for folks to choose van pool, shuttle, carpool, or whatever as part of an overall solution that gives them those choices to come in what days that make sense to them or what days their work needs them, with van pool as one of the easy solution rather than a committed one. For our part, we recognize that an enterprise is committed right now and doing a multi-million-dollar and multi-month, multi-year solution to where we are building out our van pool capabilities to do all these things. We're excited about what this opportunity is going to bring to the market and the way that we'll be able to connect with other options that are out there. So with that, we're excited about the new world. We think there are huge opportunities for us to help pull down the SOV and all of us to come together and pull down SOV. And so we're excited to move forward on that. With that, I'm going to move us to our final poll and kick it back to Dominic.
Right, great. Thank you, Neil. So, Elizabeth, diving down into some detail, if we could throw up the last poll, please. There we go. So, this is one of those multiple choice. That is multiple choice. Is it set as single choice? Elizabeth, can the people make multiple choice?
Oh, you know what? Sorry, I set that up as incorrectly. Well, pick your top. Let's see.
Let's pick the top one. Okay, all right.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't think I can change it live.
Sorry. So yeah, pick your top top area of investment for return to the workplace.
And then feel free if you want to put in the chat like what your second and third choice would be.
Yeah. Good idea. Okay, give people another 10 seconds on that.
This is kind of a hard one.
Yes, it is. It is. Cool. All right, Elizabeth, let's see what we have.
All righty. Okay.
So a couple of ample. There we go. So a short head to telework policies, and it looks like in communications and a couple of ample matching. Okay. Awesome. And
Victoria in the chat says, yeah, all of the above.
Maybe go on with Victoria. What's number two? Come on. So yeah, I would encourage people, throw up some more in the chat. If you'd like to pick, can you leave that up just for a moment to prompt people? Just take 30 seconds and people throw into the chat. What would you voted for number one? What would your numbers say number two and number three be? It'd be interesting to see that. So. Yeah, comms and telework getting a lot of
parking, telework. Yeah.
All right. So don't sell your Zoom stock just yet, is what I'm Okay, great. All right, thank you, Elizabeth.
Right.
So that's right. We've got 10 minutes left here. Time for a few questions. So please throw your questions up in the Q&A or in the chat, and perhaps I'll address this. There's the first one up there. I think some have already been answered. But there's one that's open there from Olivia. Marko, if I might throw this to you, you probably have perhaps the best insight here. Yeah, if you'd like to address that.
Yeah, absolutely. So have daily parking rates changed? So typically what we've seen is the monthly rate broken down by 20 business days, then adding a few dollars on top, right? So what employers are doing, they're not taking the monthly rate and just dividing it, that's the daily rate. They're usually kind of adding $1 or $2 because they know their employees are only going to commute 1 or 2 days a week. So in return for that flexibility, the daily cost is usually greater than like the entire month. That said, also comes down to like how you balance that with your parking provider and like what agreement you have with them and how a pass is issued, etc. And the other thing to factor in is, given your current state with parking, if you're kind of losing money or if you have a massive parking crunch, you may use it as an opportunity to intentionally increase of daily parking in order to generate additional revenue to fund non-parking programs, right? To increase the parking, make an extra $1 or $2, and then support someone who's taking transit, et cetera.
Thank you. And I'd also like, it was already partially answered. There was a question from Lawrence, and perhaps Neil, I might throw this to you. It's about the increasing cost of housing, forcing people to live further and further away, since you touched on that in your presentation. Are you hearing that as being a problem? The fact that people are now perhaps moving further away.
We're anecdotally hearing that when we talk to accounts that they're our cluster, when we cluster map and try to figure out where people are, we're seeing further and further distances. And that actually is a positive reason to be sharing. But what you have though is it's a little sporadic, so it's a little harder to find until more and more people move out there. It's a little harder to build the cluster. So we are seeing it, and you're seeing a little bit of a longer commute overall, but it's not anything that's manifested itself heavy yet.
Okay, Michele, any thoughts on that? I know you're in touch with a lot of people in your area.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one too much, but what I'm wondering is, what's going to happen with where employers are located. So we had seen this big trend around here, especially, and I think in other places too, of employers moving into urban areas. So leaving these suburban campuses and moving downtown to urban areas. And I'm kind of wondering, if we're going to see maybe a movement back to these suburban campuses with parking, and that could lead to even bigger congestion issues. So I think that's something to watch.
Right. Okay. All right. Cool. Another interesting question I'd like to perhaps address this one. Marko, you'd like to take this one initially. I think we can all have an option on this question from Andrew. Do we really understand what will move people out of their car? And I will give one almost frivolous but not quite answer to that. I'll take the example from the Bay Area. So in the San Francisco Bay Area, the biggest choke point is the Bay Bridge. And I keep an eye on what's happening as people are trying to get across the bay. And right now, you take BART, which is the major public way through the Trans-Bay Tunnel of people getting under the bay without taking their car. And BART is still at maybe 25% of pre-pandemic ridership. And they don't expect to be back to full ridership till 2026, I think, according to their numbers. However, the Bay Bridge at peak times is 90% or so of pre-pandemic congestion. So what's going to happen is we all saw that we all had charts of a steady growth in people going back to their workplace. You get a few more cars on that bridge, and it's going to lock solid, and there'll be nowhere to put the cars. So that will be one thing that will encourage people to get out of their vehicle. I'll let Marko and Michele and Neil opine.
Yeah, I think we do know really when it comes to an individual employer level. I think the challenge is that every employer has a really unique situation for them that works for them. So they might have an ordinance they need to abide by. They may have not enough parking, etc. So at an individual employer level, the nudges, the incentives, disincentives that they put in place, yeah, we can absolutely measure it. They make a policy change and we just track it day to day, month to month. I think what's more difficult to do is to take that data and say, okay, how can we all use this data to make some kind of broader statements or comments that everyone can use? I think that's where it gets a little more challenging.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, agreed. It's always about the parking, because that's the greatest enticement to drive is if there's plenty of free parking at the location, and it's really hard to compete with that for employers. So, I think it is, it's looking individually at each location, but, we do a lot of surveys. We do a lot of compliance surveys, and, cost, convenience, and reliability are usually why people say they choose their mode, but that's across all modes. So they say that about driving, but if it's a place where transit is popular, they may say that about transit. So I think there are some values, that people bring to it, but it does depend on, where you're at and what parking availability looks like there. And so how many options you have to choose from.
Right, and let me just throw one thing in there, probably not familiar to most of you, but often if a company has offered free parking for a long time, then culturally it's extremely hard to start charging for parking. A lot of resistance to that. So what some other people do is they don't charge for parking, they pay people money for not parking. So there's a way of it coming to the same effect. So Neil, I'd love to get your thoughts on that question. Neil?
Sorry, I think I was on mute there for a second. Yeah. I think, obviously people have to be incentivized for a number of the reasons that the people talked about earlier about, each individual company is going to have its reasons and its situations to help incentivize things. But from a consumer standpoint, as we look at it, in addition to the company things, it just really comes down to convenience. It has to be something that's convenient and trustworthy for me to be able to give up my independence, to be able to get onto something partially some part of the time and feel comfortable. I'm going to save a lot of money. I'm going to save a lot of stress. There's a lot of value to it. But if it's not convenient and if it's not reliable for me, and safe feeling, which I think we feel comfortable with that part, then it's not something that's probably going to work. And so that's something where we have to continue to move further down the road of making that more open, more obvious, and more convenient for folks to be able to hop onto van pools, hop off van pools as they need.
Right, and something that will become helpful there, I think, to program managers as we do that. Michele and I both spoke about the value of data. So as you're thinking about these programs and as you're justifying them, and then knowing not only, for example, particularly with hybrid work, that you had so many riders last week or last month, but knowing how many unique riders you had, saying, okay, we had ridership of 500, whatever it is, but that was made up of 1,200 different people who all got value from the program. Could be very helpful in continuing to justify the program and explain the value of it to your management. Okay. There was one other question that came up from, one second, let me look here. Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, what TDM is working during COVID? I think we've covered a lot of that. Let's take some final thoughts on that before we wrap up. What TDM is working during COVID? Michele, will you care to jump on that?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, for us, I mean, I do think that, we've seen that the shuttles can work for people during COVID. We can put in place safety measures that, social distancing, marking off seats, using, a reservation system. So as you said, people will know I won't be sitting next to anyone. I think that the people who are using the shuttles have confidence, that, and it's working for them. And then, by the same, transit the same. So some of the, the new options on transit to look at what crowding looks like so that people can feel more comfortable, getting on it, I think is basically, the things that we've been hearing.
Good. Okay. Well, I think I will call it there, Elizabeth. If you'd like, I'd like to thank everybody for joining, for your participation, for some great questions, and thank you very much. And thanks to AACT for setting this up. And I really need to learn how to use PowerPoint and Zoom. I thought I'd know by now, but anyway. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to our presenters.
All right. Goodbye.
To everyone.
Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.